"You won't see a dime, Patricia. You're too old to do anything with it anyway." That's what she said. And that was the moment everything in me went still. I had just set out 2 bowls of warm casserole. The smell of cheddar and breadcrumbs still hung in the air. Brittany didn't even look down. She set it right there in my kitchen, my own home in Charleston, where I've lived alone for over a decade since Howard and I divorced. She said it like she was talking to a secretary, a maid, a shadow on the wall. I remember the way her earrings caught the light when she turned to my son and laughed. Landon didn't speak. He adjusted his shirt cuff like the silence was something to iron out. I'm 70. I was married to Howard for 28 years. I followed him across 3 states and 6 bases. I ironed his Navy uniforms and held his hand through his first panic attack after the Gulf. I helped him start that nonprofit for veterans when nobody else would listen. But apparently none of that mattered now. Now I was just a footnote with arthritis. "You should really just enjoy your days, Patricia." Brittany continued tapping her red nails on the table. "No point getting involved with legal things." She smiled, like I was being gently put down. I looked at Landon again. His eyes dropped, shame grazing him for a second, but not enough to make a difference. Outside, the window waves whispered against the shore. A salt breeze rolled through the cracked glass. My casserole had gone cold. They didn't come to mourn Howard. They came to manage his memory. You might be wondering how a woman like me ends up here, alone in her kitchen, erased from her ex-husband's legacy, treated like a relic. Well, let me tell you, it didn't start with money. It started with silence. The kind that grows over years. The kind that hardens into assumptions that if you're old, you're done. And sometimes, I wonder if people listening to this will even hear me right. If my voice wavers, or the words feel clipped, it could be the mic or maybe my age showing. Either way, dear, if you hear anything odd in how I speak, would you be kind enough to let me know? I want this story to be heard as clearly as I lived it. Now back to that afternoon. After they left, I stood there, dishes untouched, hands trembling over a sponge. And I thought, is this how it ends? Not with grief, not with ceremony, but with erasure. Howard and I hadn't spoken in 15 years. When the divorce came, it wasn't dramatic. We just drifted. He buried himself in work. I stayed. I paid the mortgage while he ran speeches. I kept the lights on when he forgot our anniversary. Twice. Still, I never hated him. When he passed last month, I felt a strange ache. Not love, not loss, just something left unspoken. Then a letter came, from his lawyer. It said I was named as a potential beneficiary pending document review. Nothing more. I hadn't called Landon. I didn't want anything. But 2 days later he showed up. With Brittany. And that's when it all changed. They looked through my papers. Asked about Howard's files. Brittany opened my drawer without asking. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the window pane. I pulled out an old photo, Howard in his uniform, me in a yellow dress I made myself. I remembered the way he cried when he got his first rejection letter for the grant. I held him like a mother, like a wife, like someone who believed. And now I was an obstacle to be managed, not even asked how I was. Just told to step aside. I stood at the window, the photo in my hand. Below, I watched Brittany's new SUV drive off. Landon didn't even wave. I whispered to the night. If he left anything for me, I'll find it. Not for revenge, but to remember I existed. You know, folks, maybe you've been here too. Maybe not with $1 million estate. But maybe someone once made you feel like you didn't count. So tell me, would you stay quiet? Or would you show them that legacy doesn't forget? The first rejection came on a Tuesday. I remember the rain, the kind that didn't pour but tapped the roof like a child knocking at a locked door. It was the kind of day where everything felt heavier than it should. Howard sat at the table, elbows on wood hands in his hair. The denial letter lay flat beside his untouched sandwich. He didn't look up. His tie hung crooked. His shirt had coffee down the sleeve. His fingers trembled not from age but from something deeper, defeat. This was our cleanest proposal, he said, voice low. They didn't even give a reason. I stood near the sink folding a dish towel. I kept my hands moving because if I stopped, I'd show what I felt. Worry. And something sharp behind the ribs. A fear I never wanted to name. Maybe they didn't read it fully. I offered, though. I wasn't sure I believed it. Howard didn't answer. He reached for the letter again, eyes scanning the same 5 lines he'd read all morning. Then he pushed it away like it was dirty. He dropped his face into his palms. That's when I walked over. The floor creaked under my feet. I placed a hand on the back of his neck. His skin was warm and tense like a pulled wire ready to snap. "You're not doing this alone," I said. Silence. Still, I filled the kettle. Steam hissed in the cold kitchen. The windows fogged. The only sound was the hum of old wiring in the walls and the rain above us. I set 2 mugs down, chamomile, no sugar. One mug had a chip in the handle. The other had a picture of a red bird, its paint faded from years in the dishwasher. We'd gotten them at a church fair, I think, back when we still laughed in the mornings. Howard wrapped his hands around the cup. Didn't drink, just stared. "I can't keep failing in front of you," he said. I didn't answer right away. I watched him, my husband, once strong enough to carry wounded men from fire, now shaken by a sheet of paper. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You're not failing," I said. "You're beginning." His lip quivered. For a moment I thought he might cry, but he didn't. He just blinked, lifted the cup and drank, quietly. That night after he went to bed, I folded that rejection letter and slid it into a file marked, "Try again, asterisk." I stayed up late rewriting the proposal by hand, because that's what belief looked like back then. It looked like me. The first check came 6 months later. It wasn't much, just under $3,000 from a local church group, but when Howard held that envelope, his whole face changed. His shoulders pulled back, his eyes lit up like someone had finally seen him. He called it validation, asterisk. I called it hope, asterisk. We bought a secondhand printer. He used my sewing table for paperwork. I gave up the dining room for his files. I didn't mind. I thought we were doing this together. At first we were. He'd ask for my thoughts. He'd bring me tea before meetings. Some nights he'd read me his drafts like bedtime stories, asking if a line felt too proud or not real enough. I liked those nights. But then came the interviews. The first time a news station called Howard spent 2 hours rehearsing in the mirror. I watched from the hallway. He looked 10 years younger under the bathroom light. Nervous, eager. After the segment aired, people started calling. Veterans, donors, politicians. The phone didn't stop ringing, and slowly neither did he. He came home later. He started eating alone even when dinner waited warm. His voice, once tired and grateful, turned sharp and clipped. One night I asked how the grant committee meeting went. He said it's complicated. Then he changed the subject. That became a pattern. He stopped leaving papers on the table, stopped asking for feedback, stopped sharing drafts. I tried not to take it personally. He was busy, I told myself. The work mattered more than my feelings. But there were moments. Moments when I passed by the closed door of his office. He'd moved out of the dining room by then, and I'd hear him on the phone laughing, confident, using words we once wrote together. And I'd wonder, was I still part of the story? Or just its origin? No one mentions. One evening I made lasagna, his favorite. I set the table with candles just like I did when we were young and broke. He didn't come home. New call. New note. The food went cold by 9. The candles burned out by 10. And I sat there, hands in my lap, staring at an empty chair. He wasn't cruel. He never shouted. Never said I didn't matter. But absence can be louder than words. It says everything without speaking. That night I washed the dishes in silence. And for the first time I realized I had disappeared from his dream, while he had become it. She said it like she was offering advice. We were sitting at my kitchen table again 2 days after the first visit. Brittany had brought over a folder this time, glossy printouts, charts, smiling senior couples in brochures. "I've been doing some research," she said, smoothing the corner of a pamphlet. "There's a lovely new community just outside Savannah. Quiet, safe, very clean. She took a sip of coffee from my mug, the one with the cracked glaze and the blue flowers. It might be better for you long term, better for me. I didn't respond right away. My spoon clicked against the inside of my yogurt cup, steady, calm. Landon sat across from me, eyes on his phone, pretending not to hear. Of course. The papers in front of me looked expensive, bright colors, bullet points, bolded numbers. One flyer read, "Where dignity lives." Another said, "You've done enough. Now let us." Done enough? I looked at Brittany. Her makeup was flawless. Her smile held like a photo. A real estate agent's daughter through and through. "I'm not moving," I said. She blinked. "Oh, of course not now. Just for future planning." She spoke in the tone people use for children who've lost their mittens. "You have a lot on your plate," she continued, "and the house is getting hard to maintain. These places offer full medical meals, social groups." She looked around my kitchen as she spoke. I followed her eyes, the faded tile, the chipped cabinet paint, the water spot under the ceiling fan. She was taking inventory, and I was being appraised. My hand tightened around the spoon. "Thank you," I said, "but I think I can manage a kettle and a lock just fine." Landon shifted in his seat. "Britt was just thinking ahead, Mom." I looked at him. "Were you?" He blinked, looked back at his phone. Brittany smiled. "We're just trying to help." Help. That word again. The word people use when they're slowly replacing your decisions with theirs. When they start moving the picture frames on your wall, folding your towels a different way, forwarding your mail without asking, they don't steal your life all at once. They just shift the ground until you don't recognize the floor. Outside, a gull cried in the distance. I stared at the folder. My name wasn't on anything inside it. No one had asked if I wanted help. They just decided I needed it, and that I wouldn't notice the difference. But I did, and I filed it away, quietly, not in a cabinet, but in memory, where things stay sharp. Brittany closed the folder with a soft snap. Her fingers lingered on the edges, manicured nails tapping an idle rhythm. "I also spoke with Mr. Halprin," she said, like she was commenting on the weather. My spine stiffened just enough to feel it. Halprin was Howard's estate lawyer, sharp, discreet, and old school. He didn't speak to just anyone. And I asked. She tilted her head. "Well, he mentioned something interesting. Apparently in Howard's first will you weren't listed." I didn't flinch. But inside something dipped. The kind of slow, cold drop that doesn't announce itself. It just settles. "I suppose that makes sense," she added. "You two hadn't spoken in years." 16, I said quietly. She smiled as if I'd proven her point. "Exactly. People change. And Howard, he was always practical, wasn't he?" My coffee had gone lukewarm. Still, I lifted the mug and drank. The bitterness steadied me. I placed the cup back down slowly, careful not to let it clink. Across from me, Landon shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know that." His voice held no judgment, just distance. Brittany continued, eyes on me like a cat watching a sleeping bird. "Of course, the documents were updated later. The current will is more complete. More complete. Asterisk." I traced the rim of my mug with one finger. Felt the chip near the handle, a small imperfection I'd never repaired. I'd kept it because it still worked. It still held warmth. "He didn't owe me anything," I said quiet. Brittany raised an eyebrow. "You're very gracious." That word, gracious, landed on the table like a weight dressed in lace. I didn't correct her. What would be the point? I'd already learned something important: people don't have to yell to make you feel erased. They can do it with brochures and polite tones, with past tense kindness and present tense plans that exclude you. Howard may have loved me once, but somewhere between the board meetings and speeches, I'd become a closed chapter he never reread. The strange thing was I didn't feel rage. Not yet. Just the echo of something turning cold. After they left, I sat alone for a long while. I didn't touch the folder, didn't clean the mugs. The silence in the room wasn't oppressive. It was precise, surgical. Eventually, I walked to the bookshelf near the stairs. Behind a row of faded cookbooks and old newspaper clippings, I pulled out the silver frame. Our wedding photo. Howard in uniform. Me in a homemade yellow dress, smiling up at him like he was the only future I could see. I stared at it for a moment longer than I should have. Then I turned it face down and left it like that. Not out of spite, but because some things once seen can't be unseen, and I needed to forget how much I still remembered. She didn't call ahead this time. I heard the gravel crunch in the driveway. A sharp knock. Then she was already halfway inside, holding a leather folio like she was delivering something urgent but polite. Brittany smiled too wide. "Just a few quick documents," she said. "I know these things can be a pain." She slid into the chair across from mine, uninvited. Her perfume reached before her words, lavender and something synthetic sharp. I hadn't brewed tea yet. The kettle sat cold. She laid the folio down with ceremony. "Estate logistics," she explained. "Legal streamlining. Minor authorizations." Her voice was calm, practiced. But I'd lived long enough to recognize prepared kindness. I didn't answer. I simply watched her undo the folio's clasp. 3 sheets emerged, cream-colored with small print and confident margins. She handed them to me like a menu I'd already agreed to order from. "These allow smoother communication," she said. "No decision-making power, just efficiency. Saves land and time. Helps you too, really." I glanced down. One line caught my eye. Asterisk. Designated administrative discretion. Asterisk. I read it again. "Why do you need that from me?" I asked. She blinked. "Oh, just for little things, callbacks, form confirmations, routine filings." Routine filings. My thumb traced the corner of the paper. It was heavier than normal copy stock. Expensive. Chosen carefully. "I see," I said. She leaned forward. "You don't have to think too hard about it. I've already filled most of it out." I looked closer. My name was typed neatly along the top. So was hers. The signature line below mine was blank, but the date had been printed. Today's date. "You were certain I'd sign?" I asked softly. Brittany hesitated, then laughed gently. "Not certain, just optimistic." She placed a pen beside my hand. Gold, heavy, unmistakably chosen for its weight. The house was quiet. In the corner, the old wall clock ticked steadily, 3 seconds slower than real time always had. I could hear the refrigerator hum behind her, the uneven breath of a machine nearing the end of its patience. I lifted the pen, balanced it between my fingers. Her gaze followed the movement like a hawk. I set it down. "I'd like more time," I said. She smiled again, thinner this time. "Of course. I understand. No pressure." But pressure had already been applied. In the choice of words, the folder, the silence that followed each line. I reached for the papers, folded them once, then again. My fingers moved slowly, smoothing every crease. She watched. When I was done, I handed them back. "I'm not signing anything I didn't request," I said. She nodded gracefully, but her eyes tightened. "Well," she said, standing, "we'll revisit it later. No rush." She left without hugging me goodbye, without even a thank you for the tea I never poured. When the door shut, I stood still for a moment. Then I sat down again, palms flat on the table where the documents had rested. The wood was warm beneath my skin, but something else lingered too. Not heat, the shape of intrusion, and the weight of knowing they were already planning. Without me. The house was quieter than usual after she left. Even the wind outside had settled into a soft hush, brushing faintly along the kitchen window like it was asking permission to enter. I stayed seated for a long while, not thinking, not planning, just sitting, palms flat on the tabletop where her papers had been. That spot still carried a phantom warmth, though she'd been gone 15 minutes. I watched the steam from the kettle that I never turned on fade into nothing. Then I stood. My feet carried me not to the sink, not to the chair by the window, but toward the staircase. At the base to the left sat the old chest of drawers, oak-heavy, scratched in places. It had once been ours. We used to keep tax papers in it, Christmas cards, the warranty for the washer. Howard called it the brain. Said no household ran right without one. I hadn't opened the bottom drawer in years. It stuck at first. I knelt. Pulled again firmer this time. The wood gave with a groan as if it too resented being remembered. Inside dust, faded file folders, a half-empty box of staples, a button I once sewed onto Howard's jacket then replaced when it broke again, and behind the folders near the back a sealed envelope. It was ivory worn at the corners, taped shut, no stamp. Across the front, "Pat, only if necessary." Asterisk in Howard's handwriting. Slanted firm, unmistakable. My breath caught. I hadn't seen that script in over a decade, but it was like muscle memory. My eyes knew it before my heart did. I sat on the floor, envelope in my lap, knees pulled close. The hardwood was cool under my legs. My fingers ran over the words. Only if necessary. What did he mean by that? Did he write this, knowing he wouldn't speak to me again? Did he believe a day would come when someone, maybe Brittany, would push too far? I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I tilted it toward the light. The seal was intact, the tape brittle but firm. I pressed gently along the edges. No money, no thick packet, just a few sheets inside. Maybe one. The weight of it wasn't in the paper. It was in the timing. Why here, why now? I set it beside me and leaned my head back against the wall, closed my eyes. The smell of dust and old wood surrounded me, familiar grounding. Howard had remembered me in some way, planned for something, but he hadn't told me. He'd hidden this instead. And I'd been walking through this house for years, not knowing a part of him still lived here, in silence, in ink, in secrecy. I opened my eyes again, stared at the envelope. Still not ready, but closer than I was yesterday. On the first day, I waited for a phone call. By the second, I stopped expecting it. Landon didn't call. Neither did Erin. The silence wasn't loud, it was polite, measured. The kind that doesn't slam the door but simply doesn't knock. I told myself not to take it personally, but the truth is, you always do. You count the hours since the last voice that said your name. You wonder what you did wrong and when exactly you stopped being someone they checked on. By the third morning, the air in the house had shifted. Everything felt coated in something thin and stale, like dust you can't quite see but know is there. I made toast and forgot to butter it. I sat at the kitchen table with a warm mug that I never sipped. The chair across from me felt heavier than usual, emptier. At 10 a.m., I put on my old gray cardigan, the one with the hole in the cuff I kept meaning to mend. It smelled faintly of cedar and old winters. I slipped an envelope into my bag. Not that envelope. The other one. It was addressed to myself in my own hand-curled script, careful ink. I walked to the post office. 6 blocks. The wind was steady, not biting. A few leaves scuttled past my shoes. Somewhere behind me a child laughed, but I didn't turn around. The post office was nearly empty. A young man stood at the counter arguing over packaging. The clerk's smile was tight with practiced patience. I waited. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and placed the envelope gently on the counter. "Just regular mail," I said. "No rush." The woman scanned it, glanced at the return address. Then she looked at me. "This is going to you." I smiled but didn't explain. She nodded once. No judgment, just movement. The stamp clicked down with a soft thunk. The envelope slid into the collection bin. I watched it rest atop the others. Plain, unremarkable, but real. A letter addressed to someone who still existed. A name they hadn't taken away yet. On the way home, I walked slower. Let my feet scuff the sidewalk. Let the wind lift the edges of my scarf. A group of school kids passed me, their backpacks thudding rhythmically. None of them looked up. I reached my porch, ran my fingers along the mailbox. Still there, still mine. I didn't check for anything. I already knew it was empty. But in a few days it wouldn't be. Something would arrive. A letter with my name on it, my handwriting, my presence sealed and processed and returned. It wasn't proof to anyone else. But it was enough for me. In a world that had started erasing me in pieces, I had mailed myself back into place, and I would arrive. It was just after 5 when the phone rang. I nearly didn't pick up. The screen read, "Unknown number, asterisk." And these days, unknown usually means someone wants something. Still, I pressed the green button. Hello? There was a pause, then a small voice, soft but clear. Grandma, it's Lily. For a second, I didn't speak. The name took me off guard. Not because I didn't know it, of course I did, but I hadn't heard it in my kitchen, on my phone, in my world, for what felt like years. Lily, I said slowly. Honey, is that really you? Yeah, she replied with a shy chuckle. I had to get your number from Dad's old email. Hope that's okay. It's more than okay, I said. My hand moved instinctively to the back of the chair beside me, steadying. I just wanted to call, she continued. I know things have been weird lately, with everyone. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. There was something in her tone, unsure but honest. I saw your name on the news, she added. The grant. That's amazing, Grandma. I didn't even know you were part of all that. I smiled. I hadn't done that in days. I wasn't supposed to be, I replied. But somehow I still was. I think it's cool, she said. My roommate's mom runs a shelter. They were talking about it in class. College is treating you well. It's okay, she said. But it's been a lot. Sometimes I feel like I'm invisible there. I leaned against the counter, the phone warm against my cheek. I know that feeling, I whispered. There was a long silence between us. Not uncomfortable, just full. I've been thinking about you, Lily said. I know we didn't visit much, but I remember how you used to braid my hair before church, and you'd give me the piece of toast with the most jam. I chuckled. You always noticed that, huh? Always, she said. My eyes stung, but I didn't wipe them. I miss you, she said quietly. I miss you too, baby. She paused again. I don't want anything. I'm not calling about money or whatever Dad and Brittany are doing. I just wanted to say hi. I closed my eyes. That simple sentence settled in a place inside me I hadn't touched in weeks. Well, I said, clearing my throat, you just made this old woman's entire week. She laughed. Call me anytime, Lily. You hear me anytime. I will, she said. And if you ever want to visit my dorms, got real bad coffee and worse pillows. But I'll make room. That sounds like the best offer I've had all year. We said goodbye. After the call, I stood in the kitchen a while longer. The wind had picked up again outside. The trees rustled like soft applause. I didn't move. Just let the quiet wrap around me, not heavy, not sharp, just warm. Someone still saw me. And for tonight, that was enough. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and overwatered flowers. Rows of folding chairs lined the civic center hall, each with a neatly printed program tucked beneath the seat. Navy tablecloths fluttered under the fans above. Someone had placed miniature flags in the centerpieces, red, white, and wilting. I walked in alone. No one turned. No one called my name. Brittany stood near the stage, talking to a man in uniform. Her blazer was crisp, her lipstick a soft coral, and her smile sharper than either. A photographer snapped a picture just as she leaned in, hand on the man's armhead tilted just right. I found a seat in the back row, close enough to hear, far enough to stay invisible. The program began promptly. First came a moment of silence. Then a woman from the board welcomed guests. Her voice echoed slightly in the high-ceilinged hall. Today we honor not just a man but a mission, she said. Howard Bell's dream of transitional housing for veterans lives on. I folded my hands in my lap. My fingers brushed the seam of my coat wool, slightly frayed at the sleeve. Another speaker took the podium. He told a story about meeting Howard at a fundraiser years ago. He called him the quiet kind of leader. The phrase made something shift in my stomach. Quiet never meant invisible. Yet, I had been. Until now. Then came the final speaker, a man I recognized from an old press clipping, executive director of the grant committee. He adjusted the microphone, his voice smooth but unscripted. We stand on foundations laid not just by money or policy, but by people who stayed when no one clapped, who built when no one watched. He paused, then looked toward the crowd. We're proud to announce that the next phase of this initiative will serve retired female veterans across 3 counties. Another pause. And it will do so under a new name. in honor of a woman whose belief, endurance, and unseen hand helped shape this very effort. I felt the air still. Then, the Patricia Veterans Grant. The words landed like a dropped glass. Not loud, but final. People turned. I felt it before I saw it. Eyes searched. Some polite clapping began scattered unsure, then steadier. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just sat there breathing slowly, one hand pressed to my chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. The kind that doesn't need spotlights. The kind that lives in the bones. Up front, Brittany's smile didn't waver, but her fingers twitched on the edge of the podium. Just once. Landon sat beside her. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders stiffened. That was enough. Howard's photo stood beside the lectern-framed flaglet. I looked into those eyes I once knew. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. Some legacies aren't written in stone. They're carried in silence, in sacrifice, in someone remembering your name out loud. Has your name ever been forgotten until it wasn't? Leave a comment below. Your story might be the one someone's waiting to hear. Asterisk, asterisk. The ceremony had ended, but the noise lingered. People milled about the hall, picking up folded programs, exchanging business cards, arranging post-event photos. The hum of polite networking filled the space like background static, present, persistent, impersonal. Brittany was in her element. She moved between guests like silk drawn across polished wood. She posed near the podium, laughing a little too loud at the right cues. A reporter from the local station asked a question about the family's vision moving forward, and Brittany smiled like she'd rehearsed the moment. "We're grateful," she said, eyes bright. "Howard's work meant the world to us. It's a privilege to continue that legacy as a united family." As a united family. Asterisk. I stood near the wall just outside the camera frame. My coat was folded over my arm and my hands, now trembling, slightly rested atop it. Nobody asked me to speak. Nobody asked if I had anything to add. But then I wasn't the type they expected a story from. Not anymore. As people began to leave, I stepped toward the hallway exit, trying not to brush against conversations still in motion. I didn't want to be stopped, not by kindness, not by curiosity. I only wanted air. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Miss Bell." I turned. A woman, young mid-30s perhaps, stood a few steps away. Brown slacks, navy blouse, notepad worn at the corners. Her press badge hung lopsided. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't cold either. "Yes," I said. "I'm not with the station," she offered quickly. "Freelance. I was covering the housing initiative last year. I recognized you." I nodded, unsure where this was going. "I won't keep you," she added, glancing down at her notepad, then back at me. "But if it's all right off record, may I ask one thing?" He hesitated, then nodded again. "What did Howard mean to you?" 6 words, softly spoken. But they moved something in me I didn't know was still loose. I looked past her toward the stage, now being cleared. The flags were being taken down. Howard's photo had already disappeared, packed away like a seasonal decoration. "What did he mean to me?" I repeated, quieter. The reporter didn't press. She just waited. I saw him then, not in the suit and frame they'd chosen for today, but the way he looked one winter morning years ago, sitting in our kitchen, hands cupped around a chipped mug, worry lined deep into his face. I think I began slowly. He was a man who built something meaningful. My throat caught. I swallowed, but didn't stop. And in the process, he forgot some things. Some people, maybe even parts of himself. The woman didn't write anything down. She simply looked at me fully. But once I said before the world noticed him, he was someone I believed in, someone I stayed up with through nights of rejection letters and unpaid bills, someone who didn't always see me. But I think deep down he remembered I was there. I paused, then added, "He was complicated." The reporter closed her notepad gently. "Thank you," she said. "That's more than enough." She didn't ask for a photo. She didn't linger. Just offered a quiet nod, then walked back into the tide of guests. I watched her go, then turned, stepped outside. The sunlight struck my face like an old friend, and for a brief moment I wasn't a name on a grant. I was a person with a past, and someone had asked about it. The house held its breath the moment I stepped inside. It was nearly dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. The sun was just low enough to cast soft blue across the hardwood. The shadows made everything feel paused. I walked through the hallway, my shoes silent on the floor. The air had cooled since morning. Even the dust in the corners felt still. I reached the drawer beneath the stairs. It stuck just slightly, as it always did. The wood swollen with age, stubborn and familiar. I knelt, pulled again. It opened, and there it was, the envelope. Ivory paper edges softened by time. A faint crease in the corner from my thumb pressing it the night I found it. Pat, only if necessary. Asterisk. I held it in both hands. Walked to the kitchen. Saturday. The table had seen too much. My fingertips ran across faint scratches. Landon's from childhood forks, Howard's from dropped keys, mine from restless evenings spent waiting. I laid the envelope flat, took a breath, then peeled back the brittle tape. It lifted slowly, resisting like it had something to say. Inside were 2 sheets of folded paper. No stamp, no date. Just Howard's handwriting leaned slightly right, unmistakably his. The first sentence hit like a stone, dropped gently. Patricia, if you're reading this, then I wasn't brave enough. Asterisk, asterisk. I blinked. My throat tightened. I kept reading. I don't know what I said or didn't say before I left. I only know you were always there before the meetings, before the grant, before anyone cared what I had to offer. You gave me time when I didn't deserve it. Stability when I didn't know I needed it. Asterisk, asterisk. The ink changed pressure midline like his hand had paused or trembled. Asterisk, asterisk. I've heard people say I forgot you. I didn't. I just didn't know how to hold on to someone who saw every version of me. Asterisk, asterisk. That line stayed, hung between the walls. I pressed my palm to the paper, not to flatten it, but to feel the heat of what had never been spoken aloud. When the money came in, I felt like I'd finally arrived. But you'd been arriving every day, quiet, steady, never thanked. I'm sorry. Asterisk, asterisk. There it was. Not a grand apology. Just enough. I unfolded the second page. Before the grant, I set something aside. Not much, just enough. It's yours. For when the noise gets loud. For when someone tells you you're too old or unnecessary. It's not a reward. It's a recognition. Asterisk, asterisk. A line was drawn beneath those words. Then a final sentence written smaller. Asterisk, asterisk. Don't let them tell you who you were. I never did. Asterisk, asterisk. No signature. Just silence. The kind that fills your chest, not the room. I leaned back in the chair, let the paper fall into my lap. For a moment I just breathed. The fridge clicked softly behind me. The shadows on the walls shifted as the last light faded. Somewhere outside a bird called sharp and distant. He hadn't written, I love you. He hadn't written, forgive me. Asterisk. But what he left behind was enough. He had remembered me. Not loudly, not perfectly, but privately. And that kind of memory, that quiet, intentional remembering, felt more lasting than legacy. It felt like truth. I folded the letter again, slid it back into the envelope with care. And as I pressed the flap down, something in my chest settled. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. The sky was colorless when I left the house. Not blue, not gray, just undecided. The kind of sky that doesn't promise anything but still makes you look up just in case. I wrapped my scarf tighter. Didn't tell anyone I was going. Didn't need to. The walk was quiet, stores still dark, newspaper bundles resting on sidewalks like unopened secrets. The town was between breath just before it wakes. I turned the corner and stopped. The office building stood still, weathered bricks, faded blue trim. The kind of forgotten structure that waits without complaint. The sign above the door read, Bell Transitional Housing. The G in housing hung crooked just like it always had. I reached into my coat pocket. The key was still there. I hadn't used it in years. The lock turned reluctantly. The door opened slower. Inside, dust shimmered in the filtered light. Papers curled at the edges. A stack of mail sat untouched on the side desk, postmarked months ago. A stale scent of dry paper and disuse floated in the air, but it wasn't unpleasant. Familiar. I walked through the lobby, heels echoing against tile, the sound swallowed by stillness. Howard's office was at the back. The door stuck as it always had. I pressed my hip to it, same old trick, and it gave way. His chair faced the window. Desk neat. Pens still aligned in the tray. A notepad on top, edges yellowed. Time had passed here. But gently. I stepped behind the desk, crouched. There it was. The safe. Built into the floor, hidden beneath the bottom drawer. The dial shone slightly beneath a thin coat of dust. I knelt, wiped the dial with my sleeve, cold to the touch. I closed my eyes. Let my fingers turn the dial from memory. Right 18. Left 5. Right 77. June 18 1977. Our wedding day. The numbers felt strange on my tongue. Not painful. Just foreign, like a language I hadn't spoken in years. The lock clicked. Soft. Almost shy. I opened the door. The air inside was different, cool, clean. Preserved. There was no money. No folder labeled confidential. No manila file thick with secrets. Just one item. A black leather binder. I reached in. Lifted it carefully. It was heavier than I expected. Worn at the edges. A brass corner was slightly bent. Embossed across the front in small gold letters. One word. No last name. No title. No explanation. Just me. I sat on the floor, the binder resting across my knees. Ran my hand over the cover, thumb tracing the letters. There was something deliberate in the simplicity. Something unmistakably him. Howard had never been a man of flourish, but he was a man of preparation. I hadn't realized I was crying until a tear dropped onto the leather. I didn't wipe it away. Didn't move. The air in the office was still, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. This wasn't an apology. This wasn't an inheritance. This was proof. Of memory, of intention, of a place he'd made for me before he forgot how to say it out loud. I didn't open it yet. I let the silence hold us both, binder and breath. Past and present. And finally, something that felt like enough. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. The binder sat open on the kitchen table. I sat in front of it, still in my coat, hands resting beside a half-empty mug of tea I hadn't touched in hours. The steam had long vanished. What remained was warmth that lingered just long enough to remind me what was fading. The first page was dated the 2nd of October 2006. Asterisk, asterisk. The ink had yellowed slightly at the corners. His handwriting was steady before age softened his grip. Phase 1. Pilot housing proposal for female veterans age 60 and over. The words were plain. No grand opening. No mission statement polished for a brochure. Just an intention, simple and spare. I turned the page slowly. Sketches followed cottage layouts, garden paths, wide door frames. A margin note read, screen doors, soft hinges, sound matters. Another said asterisk, asterisk, ask Pat about kitchen flow. She'll know. Asterisk, asterisk. My throat caught. He had thought of me. Not as decoration, not out of obligation. But as reference, I kept reading. More notes. Asterisk, asterisk. No fluorescent lights, harsh on eyes. Bad for migraines. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Nightstand drawers with no locks. Ease matters more than privacy. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Porch swings optional. Some might not want to feel still. Asterisk, asterisk. I ran my fingers over the words. This wasn't policy. It was care. It was years of living beside broken men, beside weary women, beside himself. And somewhere in the footnotes of it all, me. In the center pocket of the binder, behind a faded receipt for coffee and envelopes, was a single sheet, different paper, lighter stock. Typed at the top, contingency designation, private account, 2007, asterisk, asterisk, 3 names, no titles. Mine came first. Beside it, a hand-drawn checkmark. I didn't recognize the bank. There was no balance listed. Just a phrase scribbled beneath the line, asterisk, asterisk, if the board forgets her, this won't. Asterisk, asterisk. It wasn't notarized. It wasn't official. But it was real. His real. The kind not meant for courts, but for correction. Further in the binder were more sketches. A walking path circling back on itself. A tiny circle drawn at the far corner. He'd labeled it, asterisk, asterisk, Pat's bench. Asterisk, asterisk. That was it. 2 words. But I stared at them until they blurred. There were no photos, no letters tucked inside, no explanations of feelings, just the slow, quiet presence of someone who had watched me, even while pretending he hadn't. At 3:42 a.m., I closed the binder. The click of the cover echoed louder than it should have. The kitchen was still dark. Outside, the streetlight hummed. A branch tapped against the glass, rhythmic soft. I leaned back in the chair, hands in my lap. He hadn't written, "I love you." He hadn't needed to. He'd written door hinges and kitchen flow and asterisk Pat's bench, asterisk. He'd made space. And somehow, after all this time, that space was still mine. Dawn didn't break. It seeped in. Thin streaks of light crept along the windowsill like quiet guests unsure if they were welcome. I hadn't moved from the table. The binder was closed now. My fingers rested gently on its surface as if letting go too quickly might erase what I'd read. I stood slowly. My back ached. My eyes felt dry but not heavy. I wasn't tired, at least not in the way sleep could solve. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle. The sound of water hitting metal was sharper than I expected. It echoed, bounced off cabinets, reminded me how long it had been since the house heard life this early. I set the flame low and waited. Through the window above the sink, the backyard lay still. The oak tree's branches swayed without breeze. The birdbath sat untouched. I could hear the tick of the kitchen clock, a rhythm that belonged only to me. When the tea was ready, I carried the mug to the living room. I didn't sit. I opened the curtains first. The sun hadn't quite risen, but the sky glowed faintly pink like it was remembering how to be morning again. Then I sat at the narrow side desk I hadn't used in years. Its drawer stuck halfway as it always had. I tugged and it gave with a quiet groan. Inside, a small stack of unused stationery, a fountain pen, and a dried flower I couldn't remember pressing. I picked up the pen, uncapped it, tested it on the corner of a scrap envelope. The ink flowed a little thick, a little slow. Still alive. I chose a fresh sheet. Then I wrote, "Dear Patricia, I see you." Me hands stilled. The words looked back at me, not in judgment, just waiting. I continued. Asterisk, asterisk. You've been quiet for so long, you forgot your own sound. You've made space for others without asking if you still had room for yourself. You've given even when no one asked why you stayed. And now, finally, you've been reminded. Not by applause, not by headlines, but by truth, and by your own persistence. Asterisk, asterisk. The tea cooled beside me. I didn't sip it. The ink shimmered slightly as it dried. You are not what they call you. You are not who they forgot. You are the woman who stayed through storms and is still here when the sun returns. Asterisk, asterisk. I signed it simply. Asterisk, asterisk, Pat. Asterisk, asterisk. No last name. No date. I folded the letter once carefully, slipped it into an envelope and sealed it, wrote my own name on the front. Not for the postman, not for memory, but for proof. I placed it on the windowsill. Let the morning light catch the edge, and I sat beside it. Not triumphant, not transformed. Just whole. For the first time in longer than I could admit, I had written something not to explain myself, but to remember her. I made the call just after 8 a.m. The binder sat on my lap closed. A yellow legal pad sat beside the phone, the first line scribbled, "Account contingency, Howard Bell, pre-grant." My pen tapped lightly against the margin as the phone rang. Wilmont Bank and Trust, this is Kelly speaking. Hello, I said calmly. I'm calling to confirm a private designation listed under my late husband's estate. She asked for my name. I gave it, spelled it twice. Then she asked for something else. I reached into the binder and read the code handwritten in the top right corner of the folded page. A sequence only Howard would have created, part birth date, part naval unit. There was a pause on her end. Then a keyter voice. One moment, ma'am. I'll transfer you. I was placed on hold. Soft piano filled the air, vague, familiar. I didn't fidget. When the new voice came on, it was older, male, measured. Miss Bell, this is Martin Glasser. I manage legacy and estate designations at Wilmont. You're calling about the Patricia fallback designation. Yes. Another pause. I see it here, proceeded the federal grant. Authenticated. Single beneficiary named Patricia Bell. Is that you? It is. He cleared his throat. No power of attorney has been filed to supersede. You remain the sole contact on record. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I'd like to schedule a review. We can see you Thursday, 10 a.m. Shall I note it private? Please. I wrote it down, closed the binder, hung up, and then I sat still for 5 full minutes. The air in the room had shifted, not cooler, not warmer, just sharper, like it was listening now. I tucked the binder back onto the shelf behind a row of old cookbooks, moved the largest volume forward so the spine disappeared. Then I cleaned the kitchen as if nothing had changed. That afternoon, Brittany called. I didn't answer. She called again, twice. No voicemail. The third time she sent a text. Hey Patricia, just checking in, Landon's thinking of stopping by later. I deleted it. The next day I went to the post office. Not to send anything, just to walk, to remind myself that I could. Inside, I passed a woman with 2 children. She smiled at me. I nodded. It felt like recognition. Outside, the sky was flat white. No sun, no clouds, just watchful. At 4:15 p.m., I returned home. Brittany's car was already in the driveway. She stood at my front porch holding a Tupperware container, blue lid too tight. Her smile was wide. Her eyes weren't. Hi there, she called. I stepped out of the car. Didn't rush. I brought you something, she said. Thank you, I replied. She held out the container. It's peach cobbler. From scratch. I thought maybe we could chat a bit. Her tone was light, but her nails tapped the lid with impatience. I took the container. Maybe another time, I said, my voice even. Her smile didn't drop, but it didn't stay either. As I turned the knob on my door, she added, "Oh, and by the way, anything you need help with, documents, paperwork, just say the word. I'm here." I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time I saw it, the tension beneath her charm, the question behind her voice. She was no longer sure what I knew, and she hated that. Some silences aren't empty, they're loaded. Have you ever chosen silence and watched someone panic? Share your moment. You might not be the only one who saw through a smile. Asterisk, asterisk. The bank lobby smelled like lemon polish and new carpet, too clean to feel comfortable. I checked in quietly. The receptionist barely glanced up before handing me a visitor badge and gesturing toward the private client wing. I waited on a narrow chair with stiff cushions, binder balanced on my lap, hands folded. Martin Glasser appeared at exactly 10. He walked with a quiet certainty, holding a folder under one arm. "Miss Bell," he said. I stood, followed. His office was small, tucked in the corner of the second floor. No view, no distractions, just 2 chairs and a desk, perfectly symmetrical. A coffee machine hummed in the background, ignored. "Thank you for coming in," he said. "Please have a seat." I did. He set the folder down, adjusted his glasses. "I've reviewed the documentation you referenced," he said, opening the file. The fallback fund was created with pre-grant capital, fully separated from public disbursements, private, undisputed. He turned the document so it faced me. A notarized designation, dated 2007, the ink slightly faded. My name typed clearly. 3 times. And in Howard's writing at the bottom ***, designated to Patricia Bell, no reassignment, no substitution, ***. There was a smudged fingerprint beside the signature. Martin pushed the file forward. This is your certified copy. I reached out with slow fingers, took the pages, read each line twice. The weight in my chest shifted, not heavier but more defined, like something that had been floating had finally landed. There's also a holding account, he continued. Inactive, unspent, awaiting beneficiary instruction. I met his eyes. No one else has accessed this. No one can, he said. Your name is sole. No override has been filed. I nodded, closed the file, placed it gently into my bag like something fragile. Thank you. He paused. I must say, most clients who come in for legacy matters don't carry themselves quite like you. How's that? With quiet certainty, he said, as if they already know the answer. I almost smiled. Instead, I stood. Good day, Mr. Glasser. He walked me out. Didn't offer a handshake, just a small nod of respect. Outside the sun was bright but not warm. The light made everything sharper. I walked 4 blocks to the cafe near Howard's old office. I didn't go in, but I saw her. Through the window, Brittany, sitting at a table by the glass back, straight lips too red for morning. Across from her was Robert Kessler, Howard's assistant from years ago. He looked older, thinner. She looked polished. He leaned forward. She handed him something. A slip of paper. He hesitated. She tilted her head, said something. He nodded slowly. I moved on before she saw me. The walk home felt heavier than the folder in my purse. By the time I reached the porch, the air had cooled. I made tea strong, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen table. I took the folder out once more. Opened it. Touched the corner with my thumb. Just once. Then I placed it into the metal lockbox beneath the stairs, right next to the binder. Closed the lid. Turned the key. Not hiding. Just holding. Later that night, I passed by the window. The street was quiet, but in the stillness I could feel it. Brittany was looking. Not at me, but for something, and she was getting close. She didn't knock this time, just rang the bell twice sharp, then waited with arms crossed and keys still in hand. I opened the door. Brittany stood there in a tan blazer too tight at the shoulders, her mouth set in a polite line that didn't reach her eyes. No cobbler today, I asked lightly. Her jaw tightened. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She walked straight to the living room, sat on the edge of the sofa like someone not planning to stay long but not leaving soon either. I followed slowly and took my usual chair. No tea, no pleasantries. Just silence. She glanced around the room, eyes moving quickly, too quickly, like she was cataloging what hadn't changed. Finally, she spoke. So, I've been going through some of Howard's old notes. Clearing out files, you know. Found some interesting things. I said nothing. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. There was something about a private fund, started before the grant. I don't know, maybe you've heard of it. Still, I said nothing. She waited, blinked once, then continued. It mentioned your name. Not in detail, just enough to raise questions. I leaned back in my chair. What sort of questions? She smiled thinly. Oh, come on. You and I both know Howard could be sentimental. That's not the word I'd use, I said. She brushed that off. The thing is, Landon's been under a lot of stress, managing the estate, handling the press. It would be helpful if we just clarified things. Clarified? Whether you intend to pursue any claim that might complicate what's already been processed. I folded my hands in my lap. And if I did? Her eyes sharpened. I think we both want what's best for the family. For Landon. For the image. I looked at her. Really looked. There was a flicker now beneath the calm. Something twitching just behind her cheekbone. A pulse of fear she couldn't quite smooth over. She added softer this time. It's not too late to step back gracefully. The room was quiet. Outside, a bird tapped twice against the kitchen window and flew off. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and stopped. I let the silence stretch. Then I said gracefully, "You say." She nodded, almost relieved. I leaned forward, my voice even. "You mistake silence for surrender, Brittany." Her mouth parted. She closed it again. I stood. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have something on the stove." She rose quickly. "No hard feelings," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. I walked her to the door. She stepped outside, turned once. But whatever she was hoping to see in my face, fear, guilt, retreat, it wasn't there. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Just a look. Calm. Steady. And for the first time she understood. I wasn't afraid of what she knew. I was waiting to see how far she'd go to pretend she didn't. Landon didn't call that night. But I knew he would feel it. Brittany left here colder than she came, and cold doesn't just vanish. It clings, follows, finds cracks. I sat by the window after she left, watching the way the porch light threw her shadow thin across the gravel. She stood outside a moment longer than needed, then left. The next morning I brewed fresh coffee. Strong, bitter, no sugar. The binder stayed where it was in the box, unopened. I didn't need to look again. I knew what was there. At 1:142 a.m., I got a message from Landon. ***, hey Mom. Brittany says we should review some of Dad's documents just to be safe. You mind if we swing by later? ***. Safe. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. By noon, I was in my car. The drive to Ellen McBride's office took 20 minutes. Her firm used to handle veterans' claims back when Howard first started. She'd drafted the original fallback designation long before the grant was even announced. The lobby hadn't changed much. Still smelled faintly of lavender and old carpet. She greeted me at the door herself. "Patricia Bell," she said, smiling. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I held up a manila folder, thin but weighted. "You always were good at reading the room," I said. She gestured toward her office. We sat. No small talk. I slid the folder across the desk. She opened it, browsed the first page. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the signature. "You've been holding this a while." I nodded. "I don't need you to act on it," I said. "Not yet." "What do you need?" "Just hold it, in case the storm hits." She closed the folder. "You trust me." "I trust that Howard did. That's enough for now." Outside the window, a bird tapped twice on the sill, then flew away. Ellen leaned back in her chair. "I'll keep it here. Locked, labeled, quiet." "Thank you." As I left, she called after me. "When you're ready, don't wait too long." "I won't," I said. But she might. By late afternoon, Brittany made her next move. I saw it in Landon's eyes when he finally came by. He lingered near the doorway, hands in his pockets. "You okay, Mom?" I looked up from my knitting. "Always." He hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Britt thinks we should get ahead of things. She had me print something, just standard authorization to review some of the old financials Dad kept separate." "Separate?" He looked down. "She thinks, maybe you're not telling us everything." "And what do you think?" He blinked. "I don't know what to think." "That's honest," I said. I didn't reach for the paper. Didn't raise my voice. I just kept knitting and said, "Tell Brittany the quiet's getting louder." He didn't respond. But I saw it. The edge. The place where knowing and pretending part ways. And she was nearing it. The envelope arrived Thursday morning. No return address, just the logo of the Bell Housing Board printed in gray at the corner. I held it under the kitchen light. The paper was heavy, meant to feel official. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first, toasted a slice of old bread, fed the birds outside like I always did. Then I sat at the table, unfolded the letter, and read every line. It was brief, polite, but it cut. ****. A formal inquiry has been submitted by Mrs. Brittany Bell concerning the pre-grant fund currently associated with your name. The board has agreed to review the original designation documents to ensure compliance and clarity in estate matters moving forward. ***. The words were smooth, clinical, but I could hear her voice behind them. I tucked the letter back in the envelope. There was no surprise, only confirmation. The line had been drawn, and she had drawn it in ink. I stood across the hall and closed the door to my bedroom, turned the lock not out of fear, just preference. The house was quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and fell silent. I opened the small cabinet beside the window and pulled out a fresh legal pad, yellow-lined, crisp, waiting. I sat at my writing desk, smoothed the first page flat, uncapped my pen, and began to write. Not a journal. Not a letter. A will. Not because I owed anyone explanation. Because I wanted to decide for myself what stayed behind. The first line came easily. Asterisk, asterisk. This is not a reaction. This is a declaration. Asterisk, asterisk. I wrote slowly. Names. Intentions. Not just money, but meaning. The bench sketch in Howard's binder, I wanted it built with my name carved under the wood, but only visible if you sat down long enough to notice. My wedding ring not to Landon, to Lily. She had asked once when she was 7 if it could be hers someday, I remembered. The cookbook with all the pages stuck together, that would go to no one. I'd bury it with me, because some things didn't need to be shared again. They'd already served their purpose. Line by line the page filled. Not with vengeance. With design. I paused only once to sip coffee, then kept writing. And as I did, I realized something. Brittany had tried to push me out of Howard's story. But this story was mine. And I was finally the one holding the pen. I mailed the envelope just after 9. Walked it to Ellen McBride's office myself. Didn't call ahead. Just dropped it at reception with a note clipped inside. Asterisk, asterisk, for safekeeping. Do not open, unless directly instructed. Patricia Bell. I didn't wait for a reply. Didn't ask for confirmation. Some things once handed over speak for themselves. Outside, the air smelled like old sun and sidewalk chalk. A father held his daughter's hand across the street. She carried a red balloon and stopped to wave at me. I waved back. Then I walked home. I didn't go through the front door right away. I stood on the porch a moment, keys in hand. The wind chime above the window sang a soft, unhurried note. The screen door creaked when I opened it. I didn't mind. Inside, I set down my bag and poured myself a glass of water. Then I started. Not in a frenzy, not in grief, but with purpose. The first box was for things I no longer needed. Old catalogs, dried pens, a shoebox full of birthday candles, none of them the same color. The second box I labeled, Keep, asterisk. I lined it with a scarf my sister gave me before she passed. It still smelled faintly of lavender. Into it I placed a letter from Lily with crayon hearts, a photo of Scout mid-leap in the yard, a copy of my old nursing license folded but uncreased, Howard's first business card back when it was just him, and a borrowed laptop. I folded each towel in the linen closet, held them a second longer than needed, then placed only 4 back on the shelf. The rest went into a donation bag. In the bedroom, I opened the nightstand drawer, removed the small gold ring I hadn't worn since 2009, held it in my palm. I didn't need to wear it to remember, but I still slipped it into the keep box. By midday, the house was quieter, the kind of quiet that follows decision. I sat at the kitchen table and made myself a sandwich. Simple, dry, enough. Halfway through, I heard the car door, then footsteps, then Landon's voice. Mom, in the kitchen. He stepped in, looked around. Boxes, open shelves. The walls looked taller without the framed embroidery. His eyebrows lifted. Are you going somewhere? I took a sip of water, wiped my hands. I'm not leaving, I said. I'm arriving somewhere else. He blinked. What does that mean? It means you don't have to understand it. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, a breeze moved through the grass, lifting it in waves. Behind me, I heard him sigh. Is this because of Brittany? No, I said. It's because of me. He said nothing, just shifted his weight like the ground had moved without warning. "I thought we had more time," he said finally. "We did. We used it." He opened his mouth, closed it. I turned, smiled just enough. "Help me with the curtains." He nodded, and for the first time in years, he moved without needing to know why. The final bag was zipped just after sunrise. It sat at the edge of the doorway, small, soft-sided, no wheels. I didn't need much. I wasn't starting over, just continuing, somewhere else. I had wiped every counter, folded every blanket, emptied the fridge down to the last jar of pickles. The house smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and old wood. Not sad, just still. I walked one last round. Not to say goodbye, just to see. The living room was brighter with the curtains tied back. The bookshelf was bare except for one title, A Field Guide to Birds in the Carolinas. I'd left it on purpose. Some pages were still marked with Howard's old sticky notes. He always liked robins best. I stepped into the hallway and paused outside the guest room. The door creaked open. The bed was made. A folded afghan rested on the edge, deep blue hand-stitched. My mother's blank. The closet was empty except for one note taped to the inside. Asterisk, asterisk. Take what serves, leave what doesn't. Asterisk, asterisk. I walked back to the kitchen, placed a letter on the table. The envelope was unsealed. I had written 2 names across the front, Land and Lily. That would be enough. The note inside read, asterisk, asterisk. Don't look for me. Look at what I built. Asterisk, asterisk. Nothing more. No explanations. No apologies. At 8:15 a.m., a knock came at the back door. I opened it to find a woman in her 50s gray braid pressed jeans, clipboard in hand. Her name was Serena, asterisk, asterisk. She worked with the Women's Veteran Housing Network. We had spoken twice on the phone. I liked her voice. She stepped inside, eyes scanning the space, not with judgment but quiet inventory. "This is exactly what we pictured," she said. "Not too big, not too polished, just enough." I handed her the keys. "The porch light sticks in the rain," I said. "You'll need to jiggle the switch." She smiled. "We've had worse." She didn't ask questions, didn't ask where I was going, just signed the form and slipped the keys into her pocket. Outside, a car waited, black compact engine running low. I stepped onto the porch. Turned back one last time. The wind chime above the door rang once, clear, bright. I walked to the car without a suitcase in hand. The driver nodded. I got in. The house disappeared behind the curve. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because something in me had already arrived. The kind of arrival that doesn't require witnesses. Just courage. Just choice. And finally space. 1 year passed without anyone keeping count. There were no parades, no grand unveiling, just the sound of shoes on gravel, water boiling at dawn, and women breathing easier than they used to. The cottages sat in a quiet loop around a shared green. White shutters, matching chairs, screened porches with rocking seats someone had painted pale blue. Patricia lived in Unit 5 BC Orner lot. Close enough to hear the fountain in the courtyard, far enough that no one knocked without purpose. The plaque at the gate still gleamed, Patricia Veterans Grant, Transitional Housing for Women 60+. The name meant something to most, just not in the way it used to. The women here believed Patricia had been a donor, a widow, maybe a nurse from the war. The guesses were kind, vague. No one ever connected the woman in the cardigan watering the basil pots with the name etched into bronze, and Patricia never corrected them. She didn't need to. Her days began early. Before the others woke, she would start the kettle, sweep the porch, fold the laundry left in the communal dryer. Not to serve. To soothe. She'd learned that steadiness was its own offering. Some afternoons she sat in the library and stitched names into the backs of donated blankets. Small ones, nothing flashy, just enough so someone could say, "This one's mine." She said little, listened often, watched the way shoulders dropped when women first realized they were safe. Janice moved in mid-April, 62, shoulders curved like she'd grown used to carrying herself alone. One small duffel, a box of mugs, no furniture, Patricia met her at the sidewalk. "You can take the lighter box," Janice offered, voice hoarse. Patricia smiled. "Only if you let me make the tea later." They unpacked in quiet. The room smelled of pine cleaner and new sheets. At dusk, Patricia knocked gently and held out a cup. "Chamomile," she said. "Helps the edges settle." Janice took it with both hands. Saturday carefully on the edge of her bed. "You live in that corner unit?" "I do." "Been here long?" "Long enough to know the quiet doesn't bite." Janice let out a soft, dry laugh, then looked down at the cup. "A pause." Then quietly, "Were you close to the founder?" Patricia didn't answer right away. She stirred her tea once, the sound soft in the cup. Her thumb rested on the rim like a punctuation mark. Then close enough to remember what he forgot. Janice didn't press. She only nodded, then took a careful sip. And Patricia, watching her, thought not of legacy or recognition, but of the stillness that follows when a woman finally takes up space meant for her. The light in late afternoon had a softness that didn't exist in morning. It curved rather than landed, brushed rather than lit. Patricia stepped out with her shawl folded over one arm, the moss green one. Lily had given it to her last Christmas, insisting it was ugly in the most comforting way. It was the only gift she hadn't packed. She didn't need a clock. She moved when the shadows shifted, when the garden turned gold, when the cicadas started their slow evening chorus. She walked the gravel path behind the cottages, each crunch beneath her step, as familiar as breath. No one followed. No one called her name. That was part of the gift. The bench sat where it always had, low under the wide oak facing west. No plaque, just stone and space. She eased down, bones grateful for stillness, placed the shawl across her lap, smoothed its corners. The oak above whispered in long, low gusts. Leaves didn't fall, but they danced. The breeze smelled of dry grass and distant tea. Someone in 3 Ampere must have boiled jasmine again. She let her eyes close. Not to sleep, just to feel. The warmth of the stone beneath her. The give of worn wood under one hip. The ache in her left ankle that never quite left after the fall in 2014. The gentle rhythmic hush of wind over everything. This was the bench Howard had drawn, scribbled between blueprints half a lifetime ago. She remembered the pencil smudge where he had written Pat's bench, then circled it. No reason, no explanation. He had never built her anything else. But this had stayed. A space, a pause, a place not to be remembered but to remember in, asterisk. She thought of Janice, of the quiet women who now walked past this very bench each evening, who sat without asking, who didn't need to explain why silence felt safer than speech. She thought of what it meant to be useful but no longer used, to be present but no longer positioned, to be seen without performing. Her fingers brushed a thread on the shawl, snagged slightly near the corner. She didn't fix it. Some imperfections weren't flaws. They were proof of handling. Patricia sat still as the sun slid down the far edge of the path, casting long shadows across the garden beds. She let the moment stretch. Let the stillness hold her, not as a weight, but a witness. Then, with no one around to hear her but the tree, she whispered, "Asterisk, asterisk. Legacy, dear, is not what they remember. It's what they continue. Asterisk, asterisk."